Hi all, we're going to do another instructive game today, and this game has the theme of attacking from the baseline. I've done quite a lot of analysis for this game. It's very complex in parts. Playing white was GM Magnus Carlsen, so the superstar, the young superstar, only 18 years old, Norway's #1, versus another superstar, Etienne Bacrot, the #1 GM in France, and only 25 years old. So Magnus, playing white, played d4, and after d5 c4 we see c6. So the solid Slav defence is being played by Etienne. So after knight f3, knight f6, we see now a transposition into one of the sharp variations of the Slav. But now after c takes d5, it starts to be like a queen's gambit declined. So with e3 now, bishop e7, white plays now queen c2 with an aggressive intent of not playing it with the idea of a standard minority attack. For example, if white had played bishop d3 castles, then later white often plays the plan of b4 and b5 positionally to get a minority attack going. White instead is playing very aggressively in this game. After knight h5, he takes on e7 and he castles queenside. So this entails some risk. Strategically, black has got pressure bearing down on the e3 point, and we're going to see that's very interesting later when it reaches a critical point in the game. After knight b6 h3, bishop e6 is played. So black doesn't want to routinely castle on the king side. He's preparing to castle queenside as well. So after bishop d3, black castles queenside. After king b1, king b8. You know, Magnus is preparing perhaps rook c1 in some variations. But after knight d2, he's also now got the possibility of f3 and e4, and maybe this knight can come to b3 to c5. So this knight manoeuvre to d2 is a nice move, and it is returned by a nice move. g6 means that black can now move the knight to g7 and perhaps play bishop f5, trying to exchange off these light squared bishops, but also potentially intensifying the pressure on e3. After knight b3, knight g7, f3 is played. So white wants to expand in the centre with e4. But as the game showed, it did seem to entail some sort of risk. After these bishops were exchanged and rook he1, black now pounced on the e3 pawn by playing knight bc4. And here, Magnus Carlsen, he's attacking from the baseline now, the theme of the game, because he moves his queen to c1. So that c1 square is not, after all, going to be used by a rook. This queen shows itself to be really good from this square. After queen g5, black is faced with a critical question now from Magnus. Magnus plays g4, and should the knight have taken on e3? Superficially, it would seem that this is a very bad idea. But let's have a look. If knight takes e3, rook d3, and white has this seemingly menacing pin on that queen on g5, so how can black wriggle out of this? Well, my analysis shows that with Rivka, that rook de8 is actually not so clear. So say knight d1, even if white does get the two knights for the rook, let's have a quick look at this. This endgame is far from clear after queen f4, because white is still under a lot of pressure here. Black's going to play rook e8, and if he can get a rook to the 7th rank, this could be quite dangerous. Ripka actually thinks this is actually slightly better for black. Let's have a look at some other critical variations here. So knight takes e3, rook d3, and now this knight d1. So say here, rook e7. So this is another variation I looked at. So black doubling the rooks and white playing this knight g2. So it seems to be a nice tactical move to reinforce e1. But black again can get an interesting endgame, and at least perhaps a draw, because once this rook comes to the 7th rank, black is able, for example in this variation, to secure a draw. So this leaving the e3 pawn to be taken seemed a little dodgy, but black actually chickens out now. Black played knight g7, and this allowed Carlsen to start attacking now on the queen side, and this beautiful queen on c1 was really proved to be a great attacking piece from there. So f4, queen h4, and now e4. So Carlsen stretching out in the centre, and after queen takes h3, Carlsen takes on d5, weakening black's pawn structure, and this d5 now is a tactical target, especially with this loose knight on c4. So white actually though played knight c5 here, with the immediate threat of things like rook e7 eyeing that b7 pawn. And black decided to try and do something about the threat of rook e7. He played knight e6 to stop that rook e7. And here now, Carlsen bravely perhaps played b3. And on the chess-based site, it seems as though Kasparov had been relayed this game. He's been lying on a beach, and he said, you know, surely black was better here, perhaps even winning, with the move knight d6. And this move is liked a lot by Rybka. Let's have a look. Say white took this pawn on d5. Then knight b5 here, and black would seem to have the advantage, because this pressure on the d line is difficult to parry. Say knight e3, knight takes f4, and black's got lots of pressure here. Or say rook h1, queen g3, rook to g1, queen f2, and it's a bit murky, this position, but black seems fine in this kind of variation. There's a decoy here, knight c2, so black would seem okay. In the game though, instead of knight d6, black really collapsed. He played actually knight takes c5, and now white's queen was really useful in these variations. After d takes c5, black's d5 pawn is clearly under fire, and after knight a5, Carlsen just pushed black off the board. He played b4, and after knight c4, now knight takes d5, allowing this token check on a3. And after rook e8, that was the final disastrous blunder. You know, maybe Bacrot could have fought on a bit more by playing, for example, knight b5, but this rook e8 allowed c6 now, and here Bacrot resigned. So why did he resign? Let's have a look at an example variation. Say black had taken queen c6, threatening queen c7 and other nasties. For example, queen takes g4, queen c7 check, and now knight b6 check, and this is a forced mating sequence. So this would be a forced mate here. So this c6 is highly destructive move if we go back. So yeah, c6 is just, and black's in real dire straits here. If there's no real alternatives, as white's now threatening c7 check. Say rook c8, then c7 check anyway, king a8, and now just rook takes e8. So black can't take because of c8 queening. So after c6 it was all over. Let's have a quick look in overview and summary at this game. So we go back, the Slav defence was played, and it transposed into a kind of Queen's Gambit declined, with white playing for castling queenside, so very aggressively, and black also castled queenside. And now there's king b1, so potentially the rook's going to c1, but as it turned out in this game, the queen actually was very useful on c1. But Magnus first did this knight d2 manoeuvre, so the knight was quite nice on b3, eyeing that c5 square. And after knight g7, Magnus expanded in the centre, and played a kind of controversial move here. He played g4, allowing black to take on e3, as though it's a kind of basic tactical trap. But maybe, you know, this is black's best chance here. After knight g7, white was able to further stretch now on the queen side, with first e4, and now taking on d5 and knight c5. And this b3 this is black's last chance to try and strive for active counterplay with knight d6. But instead black was pushed off the board after knight takes, d takes, knight e5. Magnus just played b4 here, and this is really bad for black. If maybe knight c6 is better than the game, but after knight takes d5, rook e8 was the final disastrous blunder, allowing c6. So a very interesting game. I've put my video annotation PGN in the description of this video if you want to check out the variations in more detail. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.